Hi, I'm Lisa K. Donner, along with Andrew Moran, Sarah Cowgill, Graham Noble, and Dave Patterson. And this is the Conservative Five, Liberty Nation's online TV news program. On today's episode, Biden balloons and tweeting birds join our Conservative Five as they dish and discuss the perils of indecision in Chinese spy balloon meets Top Gun. Then we follow up with a dissection of the State of the Union and ask, is everybody happy? And then we pivot to the Twitter execs face the music as Congress demands answers. And then we follow up with Just for Fun. All this and more coming up in this edition of the Conservative Five. It was all anyone could talk about, a billowing white balloon floating rather purposefully across the U.S. Could have been a peaceful weather balloon, but it was a Chinese dirigible that was spying on us. After a lot of denying, hand-wringing, and pearl-clutching, the military sent a real-life Top Gun to burst the bubble with the push of a button. Dave, you've been one busy guy this week. You've got readers climbing all over you, wanting information. We're asking for a story every day. In a nutshell, what do you think the administration did right, and where do you see them having gone wrong?
Well, Lisa, I think you need to see the administration from through the lens of what they've done in the past, and particularly through their crackerjack withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, that may be unfair, but nothing I've seen persuades me otherwise. And having said that, though, whether it was President Biden's intention to shoot down the balloon when they first identified it coming through the Alaskan Air Defense identification zone, or whether it was the spotlight of media attention, that was the right thing. They needed to shoot the balloon down, and so that they could exploit the surveillance sensors and the instrumentation that it was carried. Now, what the administration did wrong, or was unable to do, which is far more troubling, is to detect and identify the balloon when it was in the Aleutians or over Canada. If for the first time they saw this balloon, which is approximately 14 stories tall, was when it entered Idaho, that is a problem. And I think it's a problem that the administration has to address. It represents a strategic defense gap of enormous proportions. And recently, Admiral Harry Harris, former commander of the U.S. Pacific Command, raised this very same issue before the House Armed Services Committee. He said that this is a disconnect in our ability to understand these balloons, and it's something that we all should be concerned with. And to be truthful, if we are going to depend on the North Warning System, which is a string of radar installations across Canada, obviously that failed.
Yeah, well, Graham, there's a lot of political angles to this one. First of all, this isn't supposedly the first time the Chinese have brought their balloon over. Apparently, they did it 3 times during the Trump administration. The only problem was the president didn't know, the Secretary of State didn't know, I don't think the Joint Chiefs knew. Nobody knew. So what do you make of that?
Well, that in itself, Lisa, is quite troubling. The fact that now, we all know about the balloon, and of course, and they shot it down. And I tend to agree with Dave. I mean, maybe there was another agenda at play that we don't understand. But since Dave is a former Pentagon insider, for want of a better term, I would think his opinion on that is kind of somewhat informed. And I tend to agree that they probably should have taken this thing out much earlier than they did, because who knows what it was able to transmit back to Beijing in the meantime. But
they have stuck their head in the sand and decided, hey, if we don't see it, it'll go away and nobody will, care. It doesn't seem like they were concerned.
Yeah. But as for the political angle, it is troubling that then afterwards they come out and said, well, this happened several times during the previous administration. Well, if it did, then if they know it happened, then why was the president not briefed at the time? Why was the director of national security not briefed at the time? Why did these things just go flying across the country and nobody was told about it? So there's as many questions that we need to ask about that as there is to why there was a delay in dealing with the balloon this time around.
Sarah, do you think they hung out too long? I mean, I'm sort of let's be careful before we start shooting things out of the sky over the United States of America. But on the other hand, this had penetrated our homeland, and it wasn't for any good reason. People were starting to notice it over Big Sky country, and they waited till it got to South Carolina. Do you think the timing was off or on?
Oh, off, totally off. I mean, there are so many places to have downed that balloon where there are no populace. There's nobody there. I mean, there's lots of places like that in the upper West, especially Montana. I mean, I was so impressed with Steve Zink, Congressman Zink, who said, he said, shoot the thing down. And probably enough people in Montana have something in their own garage that can take it down. So somebody get this thing out of our sky.
I heard that too. That was really funny.
I think they screwed up. I mean, they didn't need to let it traverse the country and gather its intel. They could have whacked it in Montana, and they should have.
I think the social justice people should start asking why it was not shot down over Montana, where no black people live, but it was shot down over South Carolina, where a lot of black people live.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's the next.
Was it a racist decision? Was that systemic racism at work and should be obvious? And now we have to talk about that, Graham?
I think that one of the things that that everyone in the United States who's talked about this in great detail, and I think Andrew will feel comfortable with this, is that remember, this thing came over Canada, almost the entire stretch from north to south of Canada. And I would submit that there are very few people living in that area, with the exception of Andrew. And it could have easily been shot down there.
Oh,
Canada is part of NORAD.
I was just going to say, this is all your damn fault.
It traveled from Yukon to British Columbia to Alberta and Saskatchewan. And, it's not as if military officials did not know. The problem was that this was really an embarrassment of the Canadian military, because our fleet of jets can't fly above 50,000 feet. And according to reports, this balloon was actually 60,000 feet. And what's even funnier is that the new F-35 fighter jets that Trudeau ordered, it still can't fly above 50,000 feet. So I guess my recommendation to Xi Jinping is that if he wants, he can invade Canada now and take all our maple syrup and take all of Tim Hortons, because we don't have the military capacity to even fight against a balloon.
Well, I must say,
you brought up one thing. That I think we have to discuss, and that is in one of your stories, the EMP thing, which I think is very frightening. And
that's terrifying.
Could you kind of sketch that out a little bit for our listeners and viewers?
Well, yeah, I mean, the balloon could easily carry the weight of a very small nuclear weapon, and and the EMP pulse would take out most of our, if not all, highly technical electronics. Everything that has a transistor or a card is susceptible to being destroyed by an EMP pulse. And it's been known for a very long time. In fact, we have a subcommittee that deals entirely with the electromagnetic pulses. But nobody seems to have picked up on that. Very few, at any rate.
Sarah, do you think China has egg on their face, or they're feeling victorious right now?
Oh, they're kicking back, smoking cigars, and going, what a bunch of silly people over in North America. I mean, do you think we could have done that to China and gotten away with it? No, and nobody should be able to do that. I don't, and they got one going on in Latin America, unless they've shot that down. But no, I mean, I think they're laughing at our weakness, and that's dangerous. If they laugh at our weakness, everybody else is going to pick up on that too.
Well, I think, go ahead, Andrew.
One thing that's funny is that Joe Biden, he said that he ordered the military to shoot it down on the Wednesday, and the military completely ignored him and overruled him. Actually, his words, overruled him, and shot it down on the Saturday. So I think the weakness also that the commander-in-chief is displaying also would make China laugh at this whole ordeal.
Well, Dave, just before we go, what the hell were they doing over at the Pentagon if he told them to shoot it down Wednesday, or was he just blaming what happened?
Well, I think that they're very, very risk averse in the Pentagon, and it's really a shortfall in the decision-making process. Boiling it down, there are two things that are the problem here. One, the strategic gap in the defense, and two, the decision-making process and the time it takes. We cannot afford to have either.
Well, I think what we've learned in this spy balloon episode is that this administration is unable to react swiftly when the national security is at stake. Thanks so much, panel. Well, the Unity president delivered his second State of the Union speech this past week. It was a real campaign speech. And according to Liberty Nation's managing editor, Mark Angelides, a timeless tirade, or should I say a themeless tirade. What did he accomplish? Was there unity or division created? Everyone in this panel has an opinion on Tuesday's themeless tirade. But I want to start with a man who does not have a dog in the fight. Andrew, what was your take from your perch in Toronto?
I'll say that I've been watching the State of the Union address since I was a kid, and I always grown by the constant standing up and clapping. If you remove that, I'm sure these speeches could be cut in half. But, as I wrote in my article, the best way to summarize Joe Biden's address.
There was some boos, too, let me just say.
Yeah, there were some boos. And as I wrote in my article, the best way to summarize Joe Biden's speech is from an old joke from the movie Annie Hall, and I'm sure Dave will appreciate this. It says that unless I'm one of those guys with saliva dribbling out of his mouth who wanders into a cafeteria with a shopping bag screaming about socialism. But instead of screaming about socialism, Biden was howling about airline baggage fees. And I'm sure my distinguished colleagues will touch upon, the various subjects. But on the issue of economics, there was so much that made me scratch my head. It made me groan out loud. And, I don't want to dominate the conversation as I usually do sometimes, but I'll say a few of them. The whole job situation was misleading. His idea that the fast food workers are signing non-compete agreements, that was fascinating. Taxing stock buybacks and having a billionaire wealth tax, although he wants to hand them $250 billion in taxpayer subsidies. So everything he was talking about was completely mind-numbing to me. So, he's one of my favorite presidents just because of all the gaffes he has. But that was David address compared to what MSNBC or CNN said. It was a terrible address, and I'll leave it out to the floor. My colleagues discuss his.
Who wants to pick up on this one? Our my better half and our Liberty Nation senior political analyst Tim Donner could be heard groaning from the other room every time he heard the two words "fair share." Fair share. Anybody here not paying their fair share? Anybody want to pick up?
I will say, Lisa, that actually considering that around about half of the nation, and I believe it's either a little less than half of Americans or a little more than half of Americans are not paying income taxes. And so therefore, if we're going to talk about fair share, then yes, let's start with all the people who are not paying anything in at all and decide what their fair share is. My personal view is that there is a tax system out there that we should employ in place of all the current taxes we have, and that would make sure that everyone indeed paid their so-called fair share.
Sarah, every time you hear a Democrat speak, two things come out of their mouth. The rich people need to be taxed more, and the Republicans are going to get rid of Social Security and welfare and Medicare.
Oh, no, I don't get it. That hasn't even been brought up since the 80s. I don't know where they're coming up with that party line, but every liberal that I know it says that. Well, they're going to take away our Medicare and Social Security. And it's like, no. But, his speech didn't make any sense to me, but it's not going to make sense to a lot of logical thinking people. But it was like, no, you didn't do that. No, you didn't do that. And I'm pretty sure you didn't do that. And the one thing that everybody should notice about this man is he is entirely out of touch with the people who are suffering under his administration's policies. He's out of touch. He can afford a dozen eggs. People here are scrambling for that. If you don't have a chicken or if you don't know somebody with a bunch of chickens, eggs are $7 a dozen.
I was just talking to somebody this morning. She said she was in the grocery store aisle and they were standing next to the eggs. And this lady looked down at her and said, I'm trying to decide if I can afford to eat today. Yeah. And, you think about it and it's not so funny if you're on a fixed income.
It is not. And I don't understand why those people on a fixed income, the liberals who voted for this man, they complain. They want to, our income needs to go up. And I'm like, well, it's on fixed. I mean, what do you think? And just because your income isn't going up doesn't mean prices aren't. And there's a disconnect between logical thinking and the policies that this administration sells. I mean, it's ridiculous. It is absolutely ridiculous.
Graham, this was a typical speech where Biden said he had his hand in writing it, and you can sort of tell it was all over the place.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, first of all, I'd like to say kudos to you, Sarah, for managing to observe that people are scrambling for eggs. That's fantastic. And
Scrambling for eggs.
yes, that's what.
Nobody catches my humor.
Yes, we do.
I missed it.
But yeah, so going on, well, the whole speech was, as far as I'm concerned, is the only word you can use to describe it was nonsense. It was it painted such an alternate reality that it was almost beyond comprehension. I mean, State of the Union speeches are it's obviously a long tradition, and it's getting somewhat tiresome. It has been somewhat tiresome for a number of years now, but this one was particularly bad because it not just, you expect a president at the State of the Union speech to tout their real or perceived achievements, right, even though that's not the point of the speech, really. But this one was particularly difficult because all of the achievements, every single one of the achievements he touted was either something that was achieved before he became president, or it's something that it's not really an achievement. I mean, basically, if you if you shoot somebody in the leg and then you patch up their wounds, you can't take credit for making them feel better. That's not the way it works. And so, kind of taking responsibility for millions of jobs that have merely been reinvented since pre-COVID. You can't say you've created jobs when these are people just going back to work. And I could go on and on about that, but that's Andrew's field. But the whole economics section of that speech was complete nonsense. He was wrong on, or rather, he was deceptive on every single term. And what? I don't blame. And you know what, people, I just want to add one more thing. People talk about, the Republicans were booing. And okay, if we want to talk about disrespect, let's just remember that, Nancy Pelosi actually tore up Donald Trump's address. He handed her, which is traditional, the president hands the Speaker of the House a transcript of his address. And what did she do? She tore it up. So, if we're talking about a level of disrespect from 1 to 10, the booing is about maybe a 5 or a 6. The tearing up of the speech was a 10.
Well, Graham, don't you think that you had to take some joy in the fact that for that moment of reaction from the Republicans, it was definitely parliament-esque. And I really enjoyed that.
Yes, it was. It was much more, in the UK Parliament, they tend to just yell at each other all the time and boo and jeer and it's very, very unruly.
So Canada too. Don't forget Canada. Canada has the exact same thing in the House of Commons.
I thought
you people are unruly in Canada.
I thought Canadians were far too polite for that. I can imagine Canadians objecting to people's speeches by saying, "Oh well, that's a little strange."
They'd say rubbish.
Rubbish. Yes.
I can realistically say that any normal middle class or working poor person in the United States that listened to that speech was wondering, when's all this success, this beautiful rosy outlook, gonna finally trickle down to me? Yeah. And they know they're being told a bunch of hoo-ha.
Well, this is the unofficial start of his campaign. What does that say? I mean, McCarthy was struggling to stay awake. You could see his eyes. He was like, doing everything he could to stay awake. Go ahead, Andrew.
I was going to say, well, Pete Buttigieg, he was on Meet the Press the couple of days before the State of the Union address, and he was asked, the polling shows that most people don't think that if Biden is accomplishing anything. And then Pete Buttigieg says, oh, well, he's accomplished so much that it's hard to just present it to the public. The country's doing so well. So you're too stupid to understand how great of a job we're doing.
Well, we have to give the oldest president ever credit for having the stamina to get through it. Even Trump on his social platform had some friendly words to say about his successor. Thanks for tuning in to Liberty Nation and to C5, folks, and thanks, panel. Twitter executives held court on Capitol Hill this week. Their long-awaited testimony before a House committee had its testy moments. It was a cathartic and long-awaited moment this week for those who believe there is too much interference by tech giants in American society. The nation's capital was all a Twitter. I'm sorry, I just couldn't resist. So who showed up and whatever did they disclose? Graham, you're just waiting to be tapped into play. What insights can you share on this?
As with most congressional hearings, you wonder what the point of it all was really, and the reason why I say that is because so few times does anything concrete action come out of these things. But in terms of this one, here's the thing: you've got basically once again executives or former executives of a private company being hauled up in front of the Congressional Oversight Committee, which would normally be very troubling. But in this case, of course, there was evidence. I'd say not more than evidence. In fact, there was proof of collusion between the Biden presidential campaign of 2020 and various other government officials, federal government officials, collusion between them and Twitter to suppress certain stories, not just the central story here, which is the Hunter Biden laptop story, but various other stories, various other narratives that the establishment didn't approve of regarding, COVID and things like that. But here's the thing. We had three former Twitter executives go up there on Capitol Hill, and they essentially were predictably evasive. Two of the three of them said, "Well, I don't even recall, talking to anyone from the FBI about censoring any articles." And considering that one of those former Twitter executives was James Baker, who himself is a former FBI official, who was also involved in the whole Trump-Russia collusion investigation, but that's another story. If anyone from Twitter you'd think would have actually been speaking directly to someone at the FBI, it would have been James Baker, because he knows those guys.
Right.
So the fact that he said that he doesn't ever recall either speaking to anyone is a bit iffy. But here's the thing about the hearing itself. The Democrats are still going to lengths to try to bury this whole Hunter Biden story. Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez actually kind of erupted in faux outrage during the hearing and said that it was a half fake story, which seems a bit curious because which half of that story is fake now? And she started saying, well, we should be talking about voting rights and we should be talking about healthcare and all this kind of stuff. And it's, well, no, not at a House Oversight Committee hearing. You shouldn't be talking about any of those things. So it was nonsense. And then Cori Bush, another Democrat, actually chimed in and suggested that the government take over the internet altogether to make sure that the public is protected against misinformation.
Wow, just move to China. They do that there.
Yep. Exactly.
My God. Sarah, I listened to quite a bit of this, and I thought it was pretty interesting. It was pretty testy. The Republicans were really putting their feet to the fire. And the one guy said, I knew this was wrong at the time. We said it was wrong within a day, but of course they didn't do anything about it. They kept the New York Post off Twitter for a couple of weeks. They said they were wrong, but they didn't do anything about it for a couple of weeks.
Well, the Democratic Party is very good at deflecting anything that is thrown their way. They're good at it. They're good at dodgeball. They've turned the stories around. They've turned the narrative to fit what they want. I mean, they were defunding the police 2 years ago, and now, the State of the Union, it was all about our boys in blue. They are now protectors of the great environment. And when pressed, instead of asking questions at the congressional hearing, they're talking about solutions. All this is an investigation. And instead, they're throwing out alternative solutions, their narrative, we should be talking about voting rights and stuff like that. They're all prepped to say that, because the more the public hears that same message, the more that's all they're going to talk about. And that's how the Democrats, especially on Capitol Hill, get away with all this stuff.
That's how they roll. That's exactly how they roll. They're playing dodgeball, and the Republicans are playing whack-a-mole. Andrew, you are, I'll let it be known, the voice of Liberty Nation on Twitter. So you have your finger on the tweet button all day long. What do you make of this hearing? Is this, you think this is a much ado about nothing, or they deserve to be called on the carpet?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, if a platform with hundreds of millions of people are colluding with the federal government and intelligence agencies and suppressing information and targeting accounts, yeah, of course you should have public hearings about it. And you
started with the word "if." We know that to be true, though.
Yeah, of course. If you go on LibertyNation.com, we've done a great job covering all the Twitter files I've released over the last couple of months. There was a great moment during the hearing. It was between Congressman Byron Donalds and Yoel Roth. He's one of the Twitter executives, and they were sharing all these different former, yes. Right. And he showed the emails between Roth and a couple of the FBI agents, and there were these tweets in that email, and there were Roth had a response saying, "Handle these," and Donald asked him, "Okay, so who did you contact with?" And then Roth said, "Oh, I don't know." And then, but he could say what exactly was inside of those tweets. So this whole hearing was, you didn't get a lot of information, because the whole time was, when they didn't want to answer a question, was, "I don't recall, I don't know." And how can you get away with that? That's what I want to know. Perhaps Graham can explain that. But how can all these people get away with just saying, "I don't know," when clearly they're exposing themselves as liars in these comments?
I think their memories are erased in chambers. I mean, that's just the way it works.
Dave, I'm going to give Dave 1 second here. You and I both know they've got their finger on the trigger and they're pressing the button, and it's not for conservatives.
No, absolutely not. I mean, the problem and really troubling aspect of all of this is that right now we talk about, social issues, and we talk about the New York Post, but when things are suppressed that have to do with national security, and they can easily do that and have done it in the past, where it doesn't comport with the Biden narrative, this is a problem, because people who need to know in order to vote intelligently are not able to do so when it comes to national security.
Right. Plus, a lot of press is not covering. They're not covering the Twitter files, Andrew. I mean, Liberty Nation's been covering them end to end. But
I think the Media Research Center, they came out with a study, and they tried to assess the networks, how much did they cover the Twitter files over the last month, and most of them was just 0 minutes. Nobody wants to touch it, because a lot of the mainstream media, they've been exposed these Twitter files too, especially on the Russia front, where they just regurgitated whatever was said by the intelligence community without diving deeper into saying, okay, what was false, what was not false. And another thing with the Twitter executives too is that they were a lot more cautious behind the scenes than what these hearings show, which is, I find baffling, because it showed that a lot of them were responsible. A lot of them had questions. A lot of them pushed back of what the intelligence community said, and they didn't like how the federal government and a lot of these senators tried to peddle this false information onto them and force them to act in a certain way that they wanted. So I don't know why they didn't try to highlight that respect during these hearings.
Graham, I cut you off, so we're going to go back to you real quick.
No, that's fine. I think the central issue here, and I wrote this in my most recent article, is that in a society that supposedly values freedom of speech and freedom of thought, probably above all else, the default for these content moderators on social media platforms, the default should be for disclosure. In other words, if they see some kind of news article or opinion or research document or whatever it is posted to their platform, when they look at it, they shouldn't be saying to themselves, well, is this, do we have any evidence at all that what is in this article is true? And if we don't, the default should be, well, we publish it anyway. We can let people do their own research, make up their own minds, more information rather than left. Instead, what is happening is the default for left-leaning media outlets is that.
Exactly.
Whereas the default for conservative stories, articles coming from conservative outlets, the default is, well, since we don't know this is true, we're going to call it misinformation and we're going to suppress it. Mm-hmm. And that's a problem.
The most egregious case of this is the Hunter Biden laptop story. And now, his legal team has gone on the offensive and they're basically saying, it was his laptop. So, this is far from over with the Hunter Biden business, but Americans have been teased and somewhat satisfied with the ongoing release of the Twitter files so far. But testifying before Congress, really takes it up a notch. We'll keep you in the loop. Thanks, panel. It's the State of the Union sizzle reel. Hello, everybody, and welcome to the increasingly popular part of the Conservative Five called Just for Fun. Each panel member will quote either the president, mock the participating audience, or choose a line from rebuttal speaker Sarah Huckabee Sanders. I'm really not sure how this is going to go, but here we go anyway. We're going to start with Andrew. And remember, Andrew, you have to persuade the panel why this is the best example of our current situation with President Joe Biden.
Well, actually, I think there were two instances in his speech that summarized the state of the presidency of Joe Biden. The first one, and I had to stop the stream because I was laughing so hard. And he said, "Make no mistake, if you try anything to raise the cost of prison jobs, I will veto it."
If you try anything to raise the cost of prison jobs, I will veto it.
So it's the blunders that summarized the whole administration. And the second one was pretty much, he doesn't even know what he's talking about because he's contradicting himself and he's lying. The second one is when he told everyone, which elicited laughter from the Republicans too, it was when he said that we need oil and gas for at least another decade. But everything he's doing, it contradicts that and it hurts the energy industry. So I think those two instances made me laugh and that's why I love Joe Biden.
All right, Sarah, you're up next.
I'm going to go with Governor Sanders, who, in a nutshell, said, you got to choose between crazy or normal.
The choice is between normal or crazy.
And we are in crazy. This is the most upside down, backward, and on fire situation that in all of my very, very old years has seen politically. I haven't seen anything like this ever. And I've been following politics for a long time.
I need a drink.
She's a pretty interesting gal. I have to say, she
kind of rocked her rebuttal. I'll give her that.
I thought she did too. And I think she's a compelling future political figure. Mm-hmm. Comes off as authentic, and at least that's my take. I don't know what you guys think. All right. Any comments on either of these, or should we go? Are y'all nervous and see who's going?
No, because I just won. I can tell you that. I can see the fear in their faces. Yeah. I just won this contest.
Now, wait a minute. I haven't gone yet. And I'm not going to go last, but I'll let Dave go. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, one of the things that I found that was the most interesting and compelling was, unfortunately, what Sarah said. The difference. What we're given is the choice between crazy and normal. But I would go further and say that it's a Hobson's choice because you're only got one aspect of it, and that is crazy. But the other thing she said that was really important, and that is, Biden, he's the first man to surrender the presidency to a woke mob that can't even tell what a woman is.
And he's the first man to surrender his presidency to a woke mob that can't even tell you what a woman is.
Oh, yeah.
That was a good line. That was a good line.
Really good line. I got to hand it to you, Dave. I got to hand it to
And,
you.
but somebody up there in the gallery obviously knew because there was this kissing going on.
Now, wait a minute. Now, I'm going to torture Graham. I'm going to make him wait. I'm going next. Mine was a moment. It wasn't a line. And that was before it started, when Jill, in all of her purpleness, and by the way, political wives don't pick colors just by mistake. It was interesting that she chose a bright purple, middle of the road, supposedly. But anyway, when she leaned
Well, it's
over,
also the color of royalty, so maybe that was it.
as they used to say, born to the purple, right?
Very
Born
good,
to the
very good
purple.
point.
In my favorite movie of all time, Philadelphia Story.
Mhm.
And Jimmy Stewart says he's born to the purple. But anyway, I digress. So she walks in, and first, or is he second gentleman? Is he called second gentleman?
Yes.
Second gentleman.
Kamala's husband reaches over and smacks her right on the lips.
Why did this happen? And boom! Oh, front and center.
I thought it was a little odd. I mean,
It was a moment.
Yeah,
it was.
if you go on the Liberty Nation's Twitter account, we shared an image of Senator Mike Lee, and he had a face of, what the hell are you talking about? And so I think that would be a perfect response to Jill Biden kissing Kamala's husband. And it's funny, we can't remember Kamala Harris's husband's name. We keep calling.
Well, let's face it, the spouses probably have to spend a lot of alone time together just because their spouses are so busy saving this country. The soul of the nation.
All I can say is the nonverbal communication of this family between him and the hair, and, smelling and all this, and the kissing right on the lips. I was just really, that just threw me for a little.
Yeah, didn't Joe Biden touch his granddaughter's boob?
Oh,
Yeah, probably.
Cut that out now, Andrew. Frank's gonna kill you. All right, Graham, go. You're up.
Well, I chose a little more obscure one because there was so much in there that was kind of an easy target, if you like. Dave probably understands the phrase "a target-rich environment."
Oh, yeah.
Lisa, I think you and I just got spanked for the easy way out.
Well, that's what any Joe Biden speech is, a target-rich environment. But anyway, so I chose something a little more obscure. And this was during Mr. Biden's State of the Union address when he was just about to start talking about healthcare costs. And he said, and I quote,
Too many of you lay in bed at night like my dad did, staring at the ceiling, wondering what in God's name happens if your spouse gets cancer, or your child gets deadly ill, or something happens to you.
How does he know? That's what I want to know. How is Joe Biden knowing how many Americans are laying in bed staring at the ceiling? Is this another NSA surveillance program? Are they using satellites with thermal imaging to study the bedroom?
It's that Chinese balloon.
They're sharing information from the Chinese balloon. Exactly.
And the thing is, I don't want. It concerns me that Mr. Biden might know about my bedroom activities because a little embarrassing. My bedroom activities is mostly propped up watching American Dad with a Klondike bar and a large glass of bourbon.
I don't know what I expected.
You're a man after my heart with that Klondike bar.
And I don't want anybody knowing about that. So, Frank, if you could edit this last bit out, that would be great.
No.
But also,
That ain't going to happen. I'm sorry for your luck on that.
Nothing is
And the last bit, though, he said too many of you. Well, what is an acceptable number of people who are allowed to be laying in bed staring at the ceiling? Does the White House have a number there that, like, if there's too many people doing that, there's a problem?
8 out of 10 people.
They got to regulate it or something. I don't know.
It's Graham.
I just think it's a bit creepy that Mr. Biden is giving examples of what too many Americans are doing.
Because Graham, Uncle Joey likes to be in your room and watch you sleep. He loved being less than 6 feet from you. That's why I like the pandemic, because I was isolated from sniffing all of you. I like being with you. I like American people, and Joe Biden's America.
Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness. But I have to give Andrew credit for one thing, because he does this and quite in a remarkable fashion, I might add, is that he takes a lot of President Biden's up until this point unknown words and spells them correctly.
Yeah, I have noticed you've been writing those out lately. If we put them all together, I think we'd have a really interesting tweet.
I'll lead an effective strategy to mobilize true international effort to pressure.
But anyway,
There's only one word that can describe Liberty Nation, and that's
okay,
correctly.
right from Joe's lips to your ears, folks. Remember, folks, this is all in good fun. Sure, insults were intended, but politicians have a thick skin, right? Thanks so much for watching. That's it for our Conservative 5 panel today. Check out our other C5 shows and segments on your favorite video platform. YouTube, Vimeo, Rumble, we're on them all. As well, Liberty Nation has its own Roku channel where you can see all of our productions. Thanks for tuning in, and remember, surf on over to libertynation.com. Special thanks to our fantastic editor and post coordinator. He's a little quirky, but we love him, Frank Diorio, and our executive producer, Sarah Colgill. I'm Lisa K. Donner, editor-in-chief. Thanks so much for joining us today. This has been a production of libertynation.com, where truth is making a comeback.